The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Jacques van der Merwe. I'm the Sales Director at Migrating South Africa. So Migrating is the most disruptive and leading provider of EDR solutions in the market today. We instantly tell our customers if they're under attack, what the attack's impact is, and how to immediately stop the threat. So today we are presenting Hunt, Analyze, and Destroy, a multi-stage live cyber attack, presented by Alessandro Talami, our Senior Pre-Sales Engineer and Security Specialist. Just a little housekeeping before we get started today. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your GoToMeeting control panel. We'll have time for questions right at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Alessandro. Thank you very much. Enjoy.
Well, thank you very much, Jack, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alessandro Talami. I'm a senior sales engineer here with Cybereason. Been with Cybereason for over a year now, and I cover Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And thank you very much again for taking your time. I know you're really busy. Over the next hour, I wanted to show you our live attack simulation and how, by leveraging an automated endpoint protection platform, you can detect and stop any cyber attack in your organization. And before I do that, I will set the scene. I will go through a few slides just so that we understand the current threat landscape and why we need to move to a more proactive way of securing our organizations. So without further ado, I'm going to start the presentation. So I'm sure everybody will agree with me that the gap in cybersecurity is growing. The attackers are improving at a greater rate than the defenders. Organizations are being exposed to greater risk, and the consequences for the victims of the attacks are increasing exponentially. In other words, the adversary is winning. In today's world, the adversary needs to be lucky only once, whereas us, as the defenders, we have a much more difficult job, and we need to be lucky every single time in order to prevent a cyber attack. And what that means is that you can't build a wall big enough, right? If we look at the cybersecurity spending for a typical organization, 80% of that is based on preventing the bad guys from getting into our organizations. And that includes a lot of preventative technologies, such as firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, sandboxing, antiviruses, etc. On the end of the scale, we have the remainder of the 20% of the security spend, which is focusing on preventing the crown jewels that we have from getting out of the organization, but also in understanding what happened after a breach has occurred and cleaning up our environment so that we can continue business as usual. And what that does is leaves a very big gap in the middle, where we have usually little to no visibility into what is happening within our walls. Now, if we look at a typical attack, the attacker has to take additional steps in order to be successful in their mission. And just because he is infected a machine within your environment, it doesn't make his mission successful. After infecting a machine, an attacker typically has to do this, what we call non-negotiable steps, which might include establishing a command and control communication, do some internal reconnaissance within the environment, then move laterally to additional machines where the crown jewels are located. Sometimes he has to escalate his privileges. Sometimes it might want to destroy the evidence and deploy tools such as ransomware in order to cover their tracks and destroy the evidence and get out of the organization. Now, if we look at all of these steps, excuse me, they provide additional opportunities for us as defenders to detect an attack as it happens and respond to that attack and remediate it. So if we focus on all of these steps, then we can reverse that advantage, right? But we can only do that by leveraging new type of technology that allows you to collect and cross-correlate all of the data from your organizations in real time in order to automate a lot of the work that an analyst would have to do manually by leveraging obviously artificial intelligence and machine learning, and ask millions of questions every second to the data in order to detect these additional steps, these non-negotiable steps that an attacker has to take. Now, the way we do this as Cybereason is by collecting a lot of the relevant data that already happens on every endpoint in the organization and feeding that into what we call the in-memory graph database that we spent 3 years in building here at Cybereason. So we start with the easy things. The easy things are, what do we know about these processes? What do we know about these files? What do we know about these IPs or domains, etc.? Then as the data that we collect across the entire organization and across every endpoint in the organization, as that data gets into the in-memory graph database, we start to look for attributes of that data that might be of interest to us. So for example, why do we see a process that only exists on one machine out of 10,000 machines, for example? So we label that as evidence. It doesn't mean it's malicious, but it's evidence that this process is rare for my organization. And then we'll keep looking at this data across time and space. And as we see that process doing something a bit more suspicious, such as injecting itself into another process, then we label that as a suspicion. Again, it does not necessarily mean there is a malicious operation, but it's definitely suspicious and something to keep an eye on. And then as we look more and more into that data and we see that that process perhaps is dumping all of the credentials from a Windows machine, from the LSAS process, then we know now that that activity is malicious in nature, and therefore we label it as a malop, which is a malicious operation in Cybereason speak. So as you can see here, what we deliver to our clients is only the malops, which are the high-level confidence alerts that allow you to really focus on what's important in your organization. And we do this automatically, in real time, all the time. So the analysts don't have to focus on creating rules, fine-tuning these rules, looking through false positives all day long. So we automate a lot of the work for them. Now, what that means is that you have a platform that, by using artificial intelligence and behavioral analysis, is able to detect attacks as they happen within your organization in real time across the entire kill chain, from the infection stage to the command and control, reconnaissance, lateral movement, privilege escalation, ransomware, etc. And what that also means is that we are able to reverse the adversary advantage. Now, by monitoring not only the perimeter of our organizations, but every step in this cyber kill chain, we allow and we empower the defender to have multiple opportunities to stop the attack. And therefore, now as defenders, we need to be lucky only once in order to disrupt the attack. Whereas the adversary needs to be lucky every single time, because not only they need to be lucky to bypass our perimeter defenses and infect a machine, now they need to be low and slow. They need to be hiding during the privilege escalation stage, during the reconnaissance, lateral movement, etc. Because if they make a mistake, we'll catch them, and we are able to disrupt that campaign. But we also recognize the importance of prevention, right? We cannot only rely on detecting attacks. We also need to be able to proactively prevent malicious operations in the organization as much as possible. And this is why, by leveraging a single agent technology that you deploy on every endpoint, that agent is able to deliver detection and response capabilities, but also prevention capabilities, such as standard signature-based antivirus, next-generation antivirus capabilities, which leverage artificial intelligence and behavioral analysis, anti-ransomware, which also leverages behavioral analysis and deception techniques in order to understand and stop ransomware within your organization, and fileless malware, which is one of the most important modules, really, because most of the attacks that we see today live off the land, meaning use no malware at all, use legitimate operating system tools in order to execute malicious code on the victim machines. So we also offer protection against those types of attacks. And you will see in the live demonstration in a few minutes how these typical attacks unfold and what you can do to detect and respond to these attacks. So hopefully that gives you an idea as to what the current threat landscape is and why we need to move to a more proactive way of protecting our organizations. So without further ado, I'm going to now go into the live attack simulation, which will show you a typical attack across the entire kill chain with all these non-negotiable steps that an attacker has to take. And now, by leveraging an endpoint protection platform, an EDR platform such as Cybereason, you can detect, prevent, and respond to these attacks. So let me just stop the presentation and get into my virtual environment. Hopefully you can all see my screen. So for this particular environment, for this particular demonstration, I've set up 3 machines. Now these 3 machines are the attacker machine, which is where we will be launching the attack against our victims. And then we have 2 victims machine, victim number 1 and victim number 2. These are both Windows machines. Now the first victim is Robert. He is the executive assistant to the CEO of the organization that I've targeted for this demonstration. And I've chosen Robert because he's more likely to fall for my phishing attack, which I have crafted to target him specifically. So I've done some reconnaissance work. I've identified his goal within the organization using open source social networking tools such as LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. And I've created an email with an Excel attachment, which includes some malicious code that once it's executed, it will create a connection back to my attacking machine. So it will give me a foothold within the organization from where I can launch further attacks, move laterally within the organization, hopefully get to the CEO's machine, and steal the data that I'm after and cover my tracks. So over the next few minutes, I'll be going through this attack, and then I will be showing you how, by leveraging the Cybereason platform, you can detect all of these attacks and remediate these attacks. So as you can see right now, we have no active mallocs, and hopefully by the time we'll be done with the attack, you will start to see all of these alerts popping up within the UI. So as the user Robert gets into the office in the morning, he opens his Outlook, he opens his browser, he checks his emails, and he sees an email with the 2018 recruitment plan subject, and it has an attachment. Obviously, he deals with recruitment for the CEO, so he's familiar with this area. So he opens the attachment, as every user nowadays tend to do, and sees that it requires some additional content to be unlocked in order to see this hidden content that is within the spreadsheet. So obviously, not being a security-minded person, he goes ahead and enables content within the spreadsheet and sees the typical spinning wheel on his machine, which basically tells him to wait for something to happen. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to him, nothing is going to happen. Well, a lot is going to happen, but is not going to be visible to him. Hopefully, what's happening in the background is that the Excel spreadsheet that is open contains some code that is generating a lot of domains in the hope that one is going to be live, and that live domain belongs to the attacker, and it will initiate a connection back to the attacker machine and give the attacker a foothold. So as you can see here on the right side of the screen, we do have a connection from the victim machine. So I'm going to verify that the session that I landed on is the correct victim. So I'm going to type a get UID command to make sure I landed on the right machine. And sure enough, the machine name is demo, and the user logged onto that machine is Robert E, who I know from my reconnaissance stage is the target of choice. So now I have a foothold in the organization, right? So from here on in, I'm going to have ample time to do additional work, additional reconnaissance within the environment, and get to the end goal, which is get to the CEO machine, right? But obviously, before I do that, I want to make sure that I cover my tracks. I want to make sure that my additional steps, these non-negotiable steps that I was talking about earlier, are going to go unnoticed to the defenders that might be monitoring that environment, right? So there are additional steps that I need to take to cover my tracks. Before I do that, I want to make sure that we, in the cyber reason world, we have everything in order. And as you can see, we already detected initial steps of the attack. So I'm going to go back here onto the attacking machine, and I'm going to focus on the rest of the attack before I can show you the UI at the end. So one of the first things that I want to do is I want to see what processes Robert is running on his machine. Because in order to cover my tracks, I might want to move my shellcode, my malicious code, into a process that raises no suspicions within the environment. And one of these processes is typically a browser process, right? Like Firefox. Because every user in the organization typically uses a browser to browse the internet, is typically allowed in organizations, and therefore raises very little suspicions. So I'm going to migrate. First of all, let me see which is the parent process of Firefox. Excuse me. And I'm going to migrate, pardon. I'm going to migrate my shellcode into the Firefox process, so that I move away from the initial attack vector, which is the Excel spreadsheet, into a process that will allow me to move freely without being noticed as much. So now I migrated my shellcode into the Firefox process. And from now on, I can start to look into the organization, do some internal reconnaissance, and see what else is happening in that environment. So I've scripted a lot of these commands in the interest of time, because we only have an hour. So one thing that I can do is, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, I use legitimate tools that are available on every Windows system in the environment in order to in order to gain additional insight into the organization and complete my attack without being noticed. Unfortunately, NetBIOS doesn't always seem to work in my environment. I have to run a few times just to see any results. And by the way, typically an attacker would have days, weeks, or months sometimes in order to complete that attack. So they have all the time in the world, because they typically are noticed once they bypass the initial defenses. There we go. So at last, we got some results from the netview command, which is a command that you can run on any Windows machine. And I can see that Robert T is the machine that I'm on. And on the same network, there is another machine which belongs to the CEO, or whose name is Maria, right? So now I know that Robert is on the same network as Maria, and Maria is the machine that I want to get to, right? So I need to figure out a way to move laterally to Maria machine, and I need to find a way to execute code remotely onto that machine. So one way of executing code on a remote machine is obviously by passing legitimate credentials onto that machine. And these credentials should be administrative credentials. So we need to find a way to find administrative credentials onto Robert's machine, hopefully, that we can use onto Maria's machine. And before we do that, obviously we need to elevate our privileges, because right now we're running in the context of Robert, which is a simple user, right? So we need to elevate our privileges. And in order to elevate our privileges, we need to run a privilege escalation exploit. So we need to understand what operating system Robert is running. So I'm going to run a sysinfo command on his machine to get the operating system and patch level. And now there is a Windows 7 machine now, and I have an exploit that works against the Windows 7 machine. So I'm going to background this session, and I'm going to run my privilege escalation exploit that I prepared already in advance. And hopefully, if this is successful, it will give me a new session with elevated privileges. So as you can see, we have a new session open. And if I now run the getuid command, I can see that I'm running under the system context. So now I can run anything I want on Robert's machine with elevated privileges, with system level privileges, which is ideal, which is what I want. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is establish further foothold, right? I want to make sure that if I lose control of this machine, I can always go back in at will and continue my attack. So I'm going to add the user onto his machine so that I can always get access to this machine going forward. Now that I've added the user ghost to the system, I can continue my attack. And as I mentioned earlier, I want to see if I can get some administrative credentials onto this machine in order to use those credentials onto the CEO's machine and execute code remotely. So I'm going to use a resource which is very popular among the attackers today, which is obviously tools like Mimikatz, for example, that dump all of the hashes from a Windows machine, right? So I've scripted this command as well. So I'm going to run the hash dump command. And hopefully I'll get some hashes. And sure enough, as you can see, I've got the administrator user hashes. I've got the user that I've added just now hash as well. So now I've gained some credentials, administrative credentials that I can use onto my next target, right? So before I continue my attack, I want to make sure that the attack doesn't seem to come from the attacker machine, but I want to make sure that the attack is seen to be coming from Robert's machine, from my first victim machine. So I'm trying to further hide my tracks here, right? So I'm going to run a tool or a command that will route all of my commands to Maria CEO via Robert's machine. Okay, and now once that's done, I can now background this session, and I'm going to execute, to use these credentials that I found on Robert's machine onto Maria's machine, and I'm going to run some code on Maria's machine in order to give me hopefully a session back to the attacker, right? So I'm going to run a pass the hash command and see what happens. Okay, as you can see, Maria's machine is trying to connect to the attacker's machine. There we go. And we have a new session, session 3 open. Excellent. So hopefully, as I start to interact with this session, I landed on the right machine. I get the user ID of the machine logged into, which is system, which is great. And let's make sure that is Maria's machine. There we go. So the computer is Maria CEO, is a Windows 7 machine, and we're running as system on that machine. So from now on, I have unfettered access to the CEO machine. I can get any data I want. I can destroy anything I want onto that machine. I have complete control over that machine. Typically, what I would do is I would look for any interesting data and then copy over to my attacker machine. And once I have completed my mission, I want to make sure I cover my tracks. And one way to cover my tracks is to deploy ransomware. Not because I have any financial motivations, any interest in getting money, from the organization, but because I want to destroy any evidence of my attack. So I'm going to encrypt all the files on our machine so that if a defender tries to do some forensic analysis on that machine, they won't be able to understand what happened. So I'm going to deploy some ransomware, which is based on PowerShell. Again, throughout this attack, I've used very little malware. I've used tools that are native to the Windows operating system, native in the environment, and these tools are typically unseen by most security technologies. So I'm going to run this PowerShell-based ransomware, and luckily for the CEO, they had obviously CyberVision running on that machine, which had the ransomware protection module enabled, and therefore that ransomware was prevented from executing and encrypting any file on the machine. So that's the attack completed. As you can see, the attacker was successful in his mission. It infected the first machine in the organization. It did some internal reconnaissance. It escalated its privileges. It moved laterally onto another machine by obtaining credentials from that machine, and then eventually covered its tracks by leveraging ransomware in the environment. Now, let's see the defender environment, and let's see what the defender was able to detect by using cyber reasoning in the environment. Now, as you can see here in the inbox, we have 8 alerts. So we managed to detect the attack at multiple stages. We detected the initial compromise, which involved the Excel spreadsheet. And if we go into that specific alert, you can see that the victim was Robert on the XCast machine. The Robert user being logged in, the root cause being excel.exe, and it was the root cause because there was a process that was that acted as a domain generating algorithm, and we know that there were some outgoing connections. If we start to investigate this, we can see that the parent process was Outlook, so we know that the user Robert received an email on his Outlook application. This email contained an Excel attachment. These are all the modules that Excel loaded. And we also know that Excel launched an additional process, which is regisvr32.exe. We can also see that the process did 99 DNS queries that went unresolved. And these are all the queries that the Excel process queried for. And lastly, we see a connection being made outbound from that machine onto the attacker machine. Now, if I were to investigate this further, I can select the Excel process and investigate. And I can see the full process execution tree, including the parent process, the child process, and any child process being launched by Excel. I can see here all of the suspicions and evidence that led us to believe that this is malicious. Any command line that was executed. If I wanted to see what regisvr32 executed, I can select that too. And I can see the process trying to download a payload from the attacker machine. So you get a lot of visibility here into the attack. Now, going back into the UI, we can see that we also detected our privilege escalation attack. So we can see that there was some interpreter code that was injected into the Firefox process and also created a connection to the attacker's machine. And if we wanted to, we can inspect and investigate even this one. So that's an additional step that the attacker took that we were able to identify. We also saw the credential stealing attack and the pasta hash attack. So once we stole the credentials that we could see here in this step, we were able to identify the attacker moving from Robert's machine onto the Maria, the CEO's machine, using the pasta hash attack, and by leveraging the compromised user credentials that belong to the administrator. So as you can see, we had another opportunity to detect that attack in real time and to stop it. And lastly, we also saw the attempt to run ransomware onto the CEO's machine. And we can see here by this little pause button here that we were able to suspend the process and no files on the CEO's machine were affected. And if we go back to the CEO machine, as you can see here, everything is running as normal, all the files are available, etc. Right? So nothing was was affected on the CEO's machine. So no files were affected. We identified the use of ransomware by behavior, and we can investigate the execution of PowerShell and see what was executed on that machine, etc. So hopefully that gives you an understanding as to why we need to leverage an endpoint protection platform and monitor all of the stages of the cyber kill chain, not just the infection stage or the data exfiltration stage, but really monitor everything that happens in the organization across every step of the attack. And you need to automate a lot of these processes, a lot of these detections, in order to detect an attack in real time and do something about it. Obviously, in this case, if I wanted to isolate the machine to prevent the spreading of this ransomware further, I could choose an additional steps. I could choose to isolate the machine, and that will prevent that machine from communicating anywhere with anything else on the network. I can also choose to respond and unsuspend the process if I thought that was benign. I could choose to remediate if the process was still running, etc. So there are a lot of things that you can do once you detect an attack to respond to that attack. Hopefully, luckily for the defender, in this particular case, the preventative capabilities of the platform didn't allow the ransomware to execute, so it stopped it before it could do any damage. So with that, I'd like to give you some time back. I'd like to take some questions, and hopefully we'll give you some time back. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ask via the chat.
Thanks, Alessandro. Jacques, that was fantastic. So we've got a few questions here. I'm going to read them out to you as they've been typed into the questions box, and hopefully they make sense. So first question, when you say automated cyber reason, what does automated there means? So I'm assuming that that's referring to the automated hunting in the background. Maybe take us through how that works and what do you mean by that?
Sure, absolutely. No, that's a great question. So as I showed here in this slide, we automate all of these detections of all of the attacker steps. So we automatically collect data from every endpoint in the organization, and we start feeding that data into the graph database that we built here at Cyber Reason. And that graph database automatically looks for evidence and suspicions that something malicious is happening in your organization. And it does that continuously in real time all the time. This, what we call hunting engineer, asks millions of questions to the data that we collect in order to understand whether there is a malicious operation in the organization. So when you deploy the Cyber Reason agent, you don't have to create any rule. The platform works out of the box. You don't have to know what you're looking for. The hunting engine does that automatically for you. And what you get is only the alerts that are high fidelity that the platform has identified as malicious.
Excellent. Thanks, Alessandro. Next question is a good segue. What is a MalOp?
So MalOp stands for malicious operation, and is one of these stages that we call non-negotiables that the attacker has to take in order to be successful in its mission. So this will be from the infection to the reconnaissance, command and control stage, lateral movement, privilege escalation, ransomware, data theft, etc.
Excellent. Next question. Alessandro, are you doing this attack with the belief that there is no anti-malware on the system, or won't you be detected if there is an antivirus or anti-spyware or anti-malware on the target system?
So Nothing is 100% foolproof. So we live in a world where it's not if but when we get breached. Preventative capabilities are very important, as I mentioned here in this slide here. You also need to focus on preventing all you can on the endpoint. And that obviously has to include anti-malware technologies. It has to include ransomware protection technologies, fileless malware protection, etc. But you always need to operate with the assumption that at some point something is going to get through. And this is where it counts. This is what's going to make the difference. So you need to be able to detect when that happens as quickly as possible, and be able to respond as quickly as possible and remediate as quickly as possible. So prevention is very important, but prevention is not 100% foolproof. And at some point, something is going to happen, and we need to detect it quickly and respond to it very quickly.
Thanks, Alessandro. Next question. Assuming you saw the first alert come through or the first malicious operation and malop in the system, are you able to stop it before it goes all the way?
Absolutely. So there are multiple opportunities that you can take in order to stop an attack. So if I detected this malicious use of Regis VR32, I could select to respond to that. And if that process was still running, I would have had the opportunity to kill the process, quarantine the file, or delete any registry keys that that process might have written to the registry. So there are options I can take in order to stop that attack at that initial stage. I could also just isolate the machine, and that will basically stop the attack completely. So there are a lot of steps that you can take in order to not let that attack unfold until the end. This is why it's important to detect it as quickly as possible.
Excellent. Thank you, Alessandro. We're still waiting for a few questions to come through, so let's give it another minute or two. If there's anything else that you'd like to share in the meantime, whilst we wait for some more questions, feel free to do that.
No problem. I think for me, it's very important, and I think most of the audience would agree with me. Visibility is key. We tend to focus on visibility on the perimeter, and one of the reasons we do that is because you can't be everywhere on the network. There is a lot of data that gets collected. There's a big cost involved, and therefore we keep focusing on the network. However, the source of all truth is always going to be the endpoint. Something has to execute on the endpoint in order to do something malicious at some point. So we really need visibility on the endpoints. That's where we're going to see everything that happens in the organization. So I think it's very important today to focus on visibility on the endpoints.
Great, thanks, Alessandro. We've got a few questions here. So we currently have Cybereason in the environment. Is there a way to enhance the alerts that come through for more important or serious threats rather than not?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. So we have already made some improvement in mapping our detections to the MITRE framework, which gives you sort of an understanding as to the severity of the alert. But we're also in the upcoming versions, we are reviewing the malop inbox that you can see here, and we are going to add some more information that will help you understand not only the impact of the alert, but the criticality as well. So it's something that we're actively working on. We understand that more customers wants to have a better way to manage the alerts and to focus on what's more critical. So we're definitely making some progress on that as well. So stay tuned. In the upcoming versions, this will be a lot better.
Thanks, Alessandro. Another question here. So thank you very much for all the questions. They're fantastic. Please keep them coming. Most of the features and the benefits in the product are great. So obviously competition boasts some of the same features and benefits. So what are some of the differentiating factors from a technology and architecture standpoint that sets us apart?
So obviously some of the things that our customers like is the ease of use. You know, the way we display the data is very easy to understand and means that you can do more with less. You know, even a level 1 analyst can understand and do more and triage more the alerts and respond to that alert without, you know, needing to be a level 3 analyst. But I think the major difference really between us and anybody else out there is the hunting engine that we developed, this one here. So as I mentioned, we do all of this automatically. So the hunting engine that we built, that in-memory graph database that I talked about, that's really the secret sauce, and that's really what sets us apart in the organization. Because we not only collect the data, but we automatically analyze that data. We automatically cross-correlate it across the entire organization. So this is very important because we don't look at only one machine at a time in a siloed way. We look at all of that data across all of the machines, across the entire environment in real time. And that is what makes us understand that two seemingly unrelated events on two different machines are in fact connected. And that's what a lot of other tools out there cannot do, because they rely on a standard relational database, which is unable to do that, because they can only look at one-to-one relationships or one-to-many relationships. What they cannot do is many-to-many relationships in real time. So that's, I think, the biggest differentiator of all. By leveraging these graph database technologies, we can ask up to 8 million questions a second to all of the data that we collect. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Alessandro. And I think from a business perspective, a big differentiator for us is that we have local presence in South Africa. So local customer success management, technical account management, local training and implementation services, as well as local incident response management. So we've invested heavily in the local region to support our customers. So I have a few more questions, Alessandro. So thank you everyone for posting these questions. They're all fantastic. So next question, is the assumption that 24/7 monitoring would have to be in place in order to leverage Cybereason?
So the platform does the 24/7 monitoring for you. You don't need an analyst creating queries all day long. You know, the platform always operates for you. We also offer a service for those organizations that don't have a SOC that operates 24/7. If needed, we can operate and triage the alerts for the customers 24/7. So that's an option. But the assumption is that you turn the platform on and the platform would detect malicious activities 24/7 automatically and alert you when we detect a malicious operation.
Excellent. Next question, when will the Migrating attack functionality be released? That's a great question. Stay tuned. That is coming out in the next few days. So please keep your eyes peeled. That is coming out soon. Next question, do you leverage technologies such as honeypots, which you get alerts if affected?
So So we leverage different techniques, right? Obviously, artificial intelligence, data models, behavioral analytics are some of them. But when it comes to honeypots, we use deception techniques on the endpoints in order to detect ransomware. And what that means is that on every endpoint where that module is enabled, we deploy canary files. So these files and folders are strategically placed on every endpoint in different directories on those endpoints. And they're strategically placed there. And whenever a malicious process touches any of them and behaves in a way that is very similar to ransomware, we are able to then suspend or prevent execution of that process. So in a way, we do, it's not a honeypot because we operate directly on the endpoint. We don't use fake systems. We see everything that executes live on the machine. So we don't need to hope that somebody touches our fake machine on the network. When something executes on the live endpoint, obviously through the use of deception technology like canary files and behavioral analysis, we're able to stop that attack.
Excellent, thank you very much. Next question, how do we collect the data? And this was probably also a good question, maybe to talk about the sensor itself. Do we have multiple sensors? Is it one sensor? What type of data do we collect? Maybe talk to those aspects and those components, Al.
Absolutely. So it's a single sensor. It's one agent that you deploy on the endpoint, and that single agent contains different modules. So the main capability of the agent is obviously collecting the data and sending it to the central server, which runs the hunting engine. So that's the main capability of the agent. But the same agent also has additional modules such as the antivirus, which is signature-based, next-gen antivirus, anti-ransomware, and fileless malware protection. These are all modules that you can turn on or off on that agent. But it's one agent, one executable that you deploy on every endpoint in the organization. And when it comes to the data that we collect, let me just see here. I did have a slide here. We collect a lot of data from the endpoints. So anything to do with processes, so any process that executes on the machine, we collect a lot of metadata on this process. Every connection that is made by those processes, we also collect those. Anything to do with the file information, drivers, autoruns, mount points, machine information, and user information. We collect all of this data. Of course, it's all metadata. We don't collect the content of files, for example, and we don't collect the contents of network connections, right?
Great. Next question. Do we have the capability to send alerts via email?
Absolutely. So this is by default. You can receive an alert every time one of these is one of these alerts is raised. So you can just enable email notification from you would have to be logged in as a different user, and yeah, you can enable notifications and you get an email whenever a new alert is raised.
Thanks, Alessandro. Next question. We got a lot of questions actually. So before we run out of time, I think I'm going to ask one or two questions, and then we can sign off. So next question. From a deployment perspective, Alessandro, how do you recommend we deploy the Cybereason sensor to all of the endpoints?
Mm-hmm. So the best way to deploy the agent is obviously downloading the Cybereason installer, which depending on the operating system that you have in your environment, you can download from here. Once you download the executable, the best way to deploy within the environment is through software deployment tools such as SCCM. That's how typically our customers deploy. So just download the executable and just push it out via SCCM or any other similar tool.
Great, thanks, Alessandro.
The advantage of this is that when you download the Cybereason installer from the UI, it already comes pre-configured. It already knows which server to talk to. So you don't have to do any additional configuration. You just download it from the UI and deploy, and that's it, and you're done.
Excellent. I think last question before we sign off for today. Does the hunting capability have a negative impact on network resources in terms of increased latency? And I can most probably add one or two variables there. Alessandro, from a data perspective, how much data does the sense utilize from a bandwidth perspective as well? So just to repeat, does the hunting capability have a negative impact on network resources in terms of increased latency, and how much data is used before it goes back to our platform? So we've got 2 minutes left.
So that's a very great question, actually. So in terms of network bandwidth consumption, because we only collect metadata related to the endpoints, it's very lightweight. So typically what we see for a client Windows operating system across a 24-hour period is between 2 to 3 megabytes of data per endpoint per day. Now, when you think about this, it's no more than an image file on the CNN website. So it's very low in terms of bandwidth utilization. 2 to 3 megabytes per day is not a lot per endpoint. Also, when it comes to resource consumptions on the endpoint itself, we have something that we call do no harm approach, which means that the agents never consume more than 5% of the memory, for example, that is available on the machine. And in terms of CPU consumption, that typically sits around the 1%. So it's very, very lightweight. Users will never notice any negative effect, any negative impact on the performance of the machine.
Excellent, Alessandro. Thank you very, very much. Sorry, you wanted to say?
No, I just wanted to add. Also, we're running user space, which means that the risk of blue screen of death is almost non-existent. I've never had a blue screen of death in over a year at Cybereason, and I've deployed hundreds of thousands of endpoints. Okay.
Excellent, Alessandro. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to take us through the attack simulation, and thank you for everyone attending. Thank you for all your great questions. Please feel free to reach out to me. My email address should be in the chat box. If not, it's jacques.vandermerwe@cybereason.com. As I mentioned earlier, we have a local team in South Africa supporting all of our customers. So please feel free to reach out for a conversation or a cup of coffee. I'm happy to also set up and schedule a session with yourself at your offices here in South Africa. So thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate you taking the time to attend the session with us today. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.